Welcome, everybody. It's time for another chronicle. I have mentioned in the past the idea of doing a story about something that I titled Marriage and Martinis. Let me be clear about something right off the bat. This isn't about martini therapy for marriages. Let's clear that up at the very beginning. The other thing I want to clear up is that early on I've mentioned numerous times that I'm not here to waste your time and that I want to give you an idea of the subjects or the topics in this story so that you can make a decision whether you want to stick with this chronicle until the very end. But this particular story is really important to me, and it happens on two levels of time, meaning I learned about a sociological concept called Attribution Theory back in the early 80s. Excuse me a little bit today. I got this frog in my throat, and every once in a while it wants to escape. But getting back to that, in the early 80s, I was involved in a life-changing, really it was a transformative experience. And without going into the details of that, because I don't think they would really interest most of you here, I want to talk about the preparation for that event. It was a professionally organized opportunity for me to go into another country and look at essentially all the best practices involved in with their top corporations and organizations. And along with other leaders at that time, we were exposed to these best practices with the idea of being able to learn outside of our own culture and apply them to circumstances within our own culture. Does that make any sense? I hope so. But as a part of the training for that exercise, one of the fundamental mentors or teachers during that experience was a highly trained and successful psychologist and sociologist who wanted to prepare us for the learning experience that we were about to undergo. So that was one thing. Early 80s preparation, learning about something called attribution theory, and then being taught about that theory before a transformative experience. And the other final aspect of that was that after the experience occurred, and I can assure you, it was one of those life-changing things for me personally, and I'm sure for a lot of my colleagues on that trip. One of the difficulties is in communication, coming back in or re-entering into your own circle, social or professional, and being able to explain what you just witnessed. The way I kind of think about this is with Neil Armstrong. When he landed and took his step onto the moon, surface of the moon, and he made the proclamation that he did at that time, we were able to accompany him through video. But there's no way that we could understand how much that experience transformed him, because we couldn't see the blue sphere in the sky in terms of the Earth from the surface of the moon. We couldn't be overwhelmed by all those circumstances. So when he came back, no matter what he said, if you read any of the books regarding his re-entry, you understand that that's a real difficulty. How do you explain something transformative which not only has a thought component, but an emotional component to someone else. And that's difficult. Now we'll get into what attribution theory is in a few minutes. But I said there were two contexts in time. The first one in the 80s and the second one in the late 90s, early 2000 era, when my wife and I went abroad and lived overseas for a number of years in Singapore. And when we did that, we started a ritual, and the ritual was called, now I've named it. At the time, it was just a Friday night meeting, and it became Martini night, and that's the phrase we coined for it. And Martini night was a time when my wife and I agreed to make it a priority. That was the first thing. There was no getting out of it if at all possible. And most of the time we were able to create the time and space to make that happen. And what was it? It was a time for the two of us, by mutual agreement, to come together and talk about, in the present moment, and discard all the crap around you on a day-to-day basis, and focus on each other and communicate. And communicate about what? Well, everything was on the table. All the difficult topics, all the emotional ones, the intellectual ones. But the thing was, that was our time to talk about it. And not only talk about it, but sort of set the stage. If anything we talked about required further follow-up, that's what we did. So that was Martini night. Now, I titled in the teaser for this particular story, I referred to it in other videos as Friday Night Martini Night. And actually, that transformed into Marriage and Martinis, I think, in the final description or the title, which was sort of my way of making some clickbait so that you would perhaps click on the video and want to be curious enough to want to find out more, right? So, having said that, I'll make one thing very clear. This isn't about martini therapy for marriages. So if that's what you were expecting, time to tune out. It was, however, a ritual that my wife and I adopted, which I think is applicable to just about any relationship you have with your children, your friends, with observations you make about society in general. The coupling of that communication process with a background understanding about attribution theory opened up a whole new world. And I'm sharing this because it's a positive thing in the times and the chaos we're in now, where we see around us every day a lot of things that are unclear. And when things are unclear, it's a natural human tendency to want to understand why what you're observing is unclear. And more importantly, you need the closure around cause and effect. What is it that caused what I'm observing? It's almost a primordial kind of instinct that's built into our DNA where we need this kind of closure. And if we don't have it on any basis of fact, we tend to make up the loop of cause and effect. Let me give something really simple. The other day, I went to fill up my car at a local gas station. And as I entered the particular lane for filling up, there was a woman who was ahead of me, and she pulled up to the first pump that was available, and there were no other people in the pumps ahead of her, which means that she was restricting access to the other pumps so that people could take care of their business, right? And I was behind her. And at first, I could feel inside the overwhelming tendency to want to say, "You jerk, what are you doing that for?" And that's what's called a negative attribution. And I saw something that was unclear to me, and I drew a conclusion that she was either incompetent or an idiot or totally insensitive to other people around her as the reason for why she did what she did. That's the attribution. So again, there's the tendency to get closure around cause and effect in what you observe. Generally, when you do that, most humans, 60% of the time, will make a negative attribution like the one I just explained. Now, what is the reason I'm bringing that up? It's because that example is a good one. It's a good one because I fell into the trap and I didn't take what I was taught years ago in the context of my own learning to take what's called an attribution pause. And when you see someone do something unclear, I was taught to take a pause and consider the possibilities for why that was happening. Let's go back to my car filling example. Now, I had no idea really why the woman did what she did. She could have been very stressed out. She could have had a bad morning, because it was morning when we were doing this, filling up our cars. And something could have bothered her. She could have had a piece of very bad news, which tended her not to focus on the present moment and what was going on, but to focus on all the thoughts and emotions that were tangled in her head that were causing her to do what she did. But you see, I stereotyped her in a sense. Probably she's a woman, if I'm being honest. She didn't think about what she was doing. She was careless. All these negative things that occurred to me. But I won't really understand why, and I won't give that person, that human being, the benefit of the doubt. Now, we come back to personal relationships. The reason my wife and I brought the discussion of attribution theory up numerous times in our Friday night martini night. And we did that because each of us, marriages are very difficult. Anyone who's been involved in a marriage and knows how much work that involves, knows how irritating it can be at times to observe things that your spouse or significant other does in a relationship, and then to make negative attributions. And then those negative attributions build up. And pretty soon you have what is created inside of you, a real negative emotion about the person that you're living with day to day. Now, the same thing can happen to your kids. It can happen to your best friends. It can happen to your coworkers. It can happen to all kinds of things you see in your daily life. So, and here's the other thing that we learned, and we tried to teach ourselves in our Friday night discussions. we eliminated a couple of words that were sort of words that we agreed that were false assumptions. One of those words was the word fine. Now, how many times have you observed someone in your life that doesn't appear to be functioning on all cylinders at the moment, and you ask them, what's the matter? And they say, oh, it's nothing, I'm just fine. Or how are you? I'm just fine. That is the most ridiculous answer that I could ever conceive of, because it tells the other person absolutely nothing about what's going on at the moment or in your life. And how many times have we done that? How many times have we shut down a communication with another person because they said, I'm fine? And that isn't true. And so that really is kind of a harbinger. I screwed that word up. Harbinger of what could be in regard to the future in that relationship. Let's go on to another example. Now, another expression is dealing with a feeling of not being good enough as a reason for not wanting to try something different. Now, enough is my other hate word, so I've got two now, fine and enough. And I can't tell you the number of times in my life when I've witnessed people not attempting to do something different or to say something that they really felt to another person because they've diminished themselves with the feeling that I'm not good enough. I never would have engaged in a lot of the activities that I have a passion for: writing, painting, fly fishing, meeting with friends, trying new things. If I would have let my inner feeling of not being good enough stop me from wanting to participate. And so that's my other hate word. Now, I'm going to take a small break, and I'm going to come back to this in a minute, and we're going to go through some of the things that my wife and I made part of this ritual. The rules we had, the kinds of things we engaged in, and the benefits that have helped us over the course of our lives. So I'll get back to that in a minute. I'm going to take a few swallows of water, and I'll be right with you. I took a sip of water, and I hopefully will remove my congestion a bit. Now, let's get back to what we were talking about. A long time ago, we decided to, every Friday night, we made a pact to try to sit down and with a martini. We only had one, by the way. And we would really sit down with some very specific purpose, and that was to talk about everything. And I mean everything. So let's look at some of the rules that help make this communication process work. All right, the first one, we made this, I'm going to refer to some notes here, so I might break eye contact because I don't want to miss any of these points. The first rule was this was a non-negotiable priority. We didn't just come to a Friday and pass this off. If Friday didn't work, we would shift to a Saturday or a Sunday, but it always happened. And it always happened on a regular basis. Rule number 2. The setting had to be distraction-free. It was quiet. and it was comfortable, and it was focused. Rule number 3, we showed up ready to listen. And we showed up with a commitment to try to be totally present, not distracted by phones, messages, anything else, but listen and be present to what the other person was saying so that we could pick up on those emotional things that are often communicated but not in words. Okay? So, the 4th rule was, as I said before, we banned the word fine, and if either one of us asked, "How are you?" fine wasn't an acceptable answer. So we developed a check-in process. At the beginning of the conversation, we decided, okay, on a number from 1 to 10, 10 being ecstatic and 1 being completely down in the dumps. What's your number? So it was a way of calibrating. If I was having a bad day and said 4 when we went into the Friday night, then she had the option of saying, okay, so how was your day? Or what happened? Or why are you at 4? And we would go from there. But that calibration is really important, because if you don't do that, there's a tendency to not really be present. You're focused on what happened that day and all the emotional thought baggage that you have going on in your head, and you're really not listening. Okay? So now, the other thing that I want to emphasize is our sessions didn't have a time limit. And I think this is really important. They usually lasted for 2 hours, but we were prepared to go as long as it took to finish the discussion we had. But normally 2 hours was enough. And if we did it every Friday night, that's a lot of what I call quality communication. Now, if you don't believe that, sit back and ask yourself a question. With your child, or with your best friend, or with your spouse, or whomever, how many times can you actually say during the course of a week that you had time set aside for a quality interaction? Prior to this ritual, I could safely say we could go for months without really sitting down, preoccupied with our work, with all the other things that it takes to live in life. And that was sort of a thing that can easily begin to be the erosion that tends to make you lose track of the balance of your priorities. If your priority is building a relationship, if it isn't founded on trust and good communication, I think the odds are that it will fail over time, and it won't take too long. When I said our Friday night discussions, the topics related to anything and everything, and nothing was off limits. I want to make sure I give you a concrete idea of what that means. That means the following, and I'm going to look to make sure that I don't forget anything. That means things from sex to social life, to friends, to health, to who does what chores, to money, to fun, to mood, to kids, to family, new goals, unmet goals, unfulfilled needs, bothersome little stuff in the future. And we would always try to reserve, in fact, sometimes we referred to Martini night as dream night. And because that required explanation, we usually just told friends, yeah, it's Friday nights our Martini night, not it's Friday night our dream night, right? But dreaming is important when it's mutual. And what is it that you dream about? What is it that you want to do? Are we on the same plane? Are we growing together, or are we growing apart? What are your priorities, really? And that's really important. Now, there's times looking back where I can think of relational failures in my life, relationship failures, that were based on the fact that I had my priorities out of sync. I put priority on things that weren't really important in the long term. Instead, I tend to focus on the short term, making sure I got that new job, making sure I did this, looking at all the resume accomplishments that I could put on my checklist. Those kind of things, which in the grand scheme of things are not really important. So that was the meaning behind everything is on the table. Now, at the end of these sessions, we would step back and say, okay, we'd have a little list, and it was revolving. And let's say, for example, one that's revolving all the time. I'm 77 at the moment. I would love to go to my homeland, Scotland. I dream about it a lot. I share this with my wife, and it's sort of on our bucket list. She wants to go too, but for different reasons. We met a wonderful couple when we were overseas, and they were from Scotland. And they're over there now, and they've invited us numerous times. But when we started contemplating this dream, it was prior to COVID, and then after that, it's been one thing after another. And right now there's all this turmoil, and no one knows for certain about what's happening and what's going to happen. So it keeps getting put off, but it's still a dream. And I'd still love to see these friends, and I want to make that a priority. So on Martini night, that's what we do a lot. We brainstorm. If this is something we want to do, how do we really make that happen? And I believe that in sharing this process with you, I'm giving my experiences and the activities I shared with someone I love, my wife, and I'm opening up about them because I feel very strongly that they're a benefit. And if no one ever subscribes to my channel, or no one ever cares about this particular story, I believe in my heart that one day my kids or my grandchildren will be able to come to this video and see this old guy, this old geezer traveling to Geezerville. They'll see him and they'll understand some of what he thought, and some of what he felt, and some of the most important things that guided his life. Those are the things that I hope to pass on. And if you've found benefit in this story, I'd hope you would share it with someone else. I mean, I don't believe in singing in a closet or telling a story in a room all by yourself. Stories are meant to be shared. And it's the basis of everything. Conversation, sharing, stories. It's the way we learn, in my view, really learn and understand what it is we've learned. That's all for now. And I hope you have a great day. And until then, make some hope and share it with others. Every day is special, and it's your turn to make some hope and share it with somebody else. Thanks a bunch.